All right, let's go ahead and get started while other people are joining here. Thank you again for joining. Again, my name is Corey Ramsden from Solar United Neighbors, and our moderator tonight is Lisa Rimmert, also of Solar United Neighbors. And we're really glad that you're here. This is the second in a three-part series on community solar that we're putting out every Wednesday for 3 weeks. Last week was our Consumer Basics webinar, which we have a recording that we circulated for folks who attended. We're going to be posting all these on YouTube as well. If you're here tonight, you have to leave early. Or if you know anybody who registered that couldn't make it, we'll be sending out after this also a recording from the Zoom platform. So you'll get an email from us in about a day with the recording and any of the links that we put into the chat. Well, let's jump right in here. First up, just want a little bit of logistics here. As you're aware, you can, right now everyone's muted. If we have time at the end, happy to unmute people to ask questions, but feel free to make it interactive. We want to hear your questions all along. These will be on that chat box there. Feel free to submit those in the chat box at any time. If you like to raise your hand later on at the end, we can use that feature for asking a question live, but during the presentation, feel free to just chat them and we'll moderate those and pick those up as they come along. And I'll stop periodically to make sure that anybody has a question that you can go ahead and ask that. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a three-part series. We're on the second one here, which is a survey of a little bit of survey of program types and what makes a community solar program community solar. And then the next one, which is next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time, is on growing your own, as we like to call it, or project development. So this is specifically for community members who are interested in encouraging or creating a project and what's involved. Very much entry-level sort of basic vocabulary and some ideas and concepts that can help you get a little further down the road if you're thinking about doing that in a place that supports community solar. First, the obligatory who we are slides. I promise I won't do too much on these, but for folks that don't know us as well, we are Solar United Neighbors. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. And what we're really doing at the end of the day is a mix of projects and policy. We're helping people go solar on a regular basis through a variety of different ways, including our solar co-ops, where we're helping groups of homeowners come together, use their collective buying power, and install solar on their property. That's not what we're talking about tonight, which is community solar, and I'll give a little background on that in a couple of slides. But ultimately, we are building a network of people who are producing their own electricity or directly connected to the solar economy, and some of which hopefully are interested, and we see this across the country, in advocating in their interest and in the interest of expanding policies that support solar throughout the United States at the state and local and national level. So that's who we are, that's why we're around. Community solar is a really important part of that because it expands access, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. A little bit of the origin story, not nearly as exciting as maybe the Avengers or some other origin stories, but still kind of cool. Our executive director from the lives in Washington, D.C. Her name is Anya Schoolman, and back in 2007, her son, that's him on the left, and his friend on the right, were interested in installing solar. They watched An Inconvenient Truth, and they wanted to do it as in response to climate change. Folks have lots of different motivations, but that was theirs. And they did some research and realized ultimately that they needed to do this together. So they formed a group of neighbors. They sorted through all of the issues that they ran into way back in 2007, policies that needed to be changed, incentives that were there or weren't there, finding installers, figuring out all the technology and all of that. They said, let's just do this as a group. It's going to be easier. And they ultimately took 40 people solar in that neighborhood over that time, over a 2-year period. That was what they called the Mount Pleasant Solar Co-op. And it's the core of a lot of what we do today, where we're helping people go solar directly on their rooftops. Again, that's not what we're doing here, but it's the same idea, which is that we are helping people understand how to directly connect to the solar economy for themselves and how to benefit, and really guiding folks along and making sure they have what they need to do that, which is still very much part of our mission today. Speaking of which, our mission has expanded quite a bit. We're in all the states you see in orange with people on the ground, but we are a national organization. We have offerings in all 50 states for folks that are interested in going solar. In those states where we have staff, we have deeper offerings and we do more intense policy work. But if you're someplace that's not in one of these states, you can still be a member of Solar United Neighbors. We have a lot of different membership offerings for people, including people who are already solar, people are interested in going solar, or if you're really just a solar advocate and you want to stay connected to our work. We welcome everyone in that, and as well as industry and other folks who want to make sure that the solar economy expands. So that's why we're here, and we are a national organization today. So let's get right to it now. What is community solar? I know the next two slides are gonna be a little bit of backtracking for folks who maybe have more experience or were here last week, but I wanna make sure we have sort of a level idea here because it can be confusing for folks who are coming to this a little more fresh. When we say community solar, it has a lot of different names, a couple of them here: community shared solar, solar gardens, depending on where you are. But what we're really talking about is an installation of panels that are usually somewhere else other than your property. They're gonna be on a field, they might be on a rooftop, they might be in a canopy of a building or a parking lot. And the electricity from that solar is gonna go into the grid and power things around it. But because of the way the program is structured, you're gonna be able to subscribe to some of that electricity and get credits on your bill like it's on your roof. So it's a parallel when it's working at its best, for it to be a parallel to what you would have for rooftop solar. And it's proportional. It might be a very large array, which takes advantage of economies of scale, but you're really only subscribing to whatever you need to offset some or all of your electricity usage. Works in a lot of different contexts, not just residential, but business, municipalities. It's a very flexible tool, and it's a way for us to expand access. Speaking of which, so why community solar? Why do we care? We help people go solar on rooftops every day. Not all of them can go solar directly. They might have a bad roof. They might have no roof if they're a renter. They might live in a multifamily building, might have problems sourcing financing to pay for solar. All of these things are in the mix. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is make sure as many people can access the solar economy as possible. So when you add community solar to rooftop solar, you really make a larger market for people who ultimately can directly benefit. And why is it important? Is because one, a good community solar program is going to offer you be able to deliver cheaper electricity than what you're getting now through your utility. It's not always true, but ideally it should be. It's fair access for solar, so people who maybe are shut out because they don't have a rooftop or all the reasons I just mentioned, it's important for us to make sure that everyone can access it. Three, that wider participation in our clean energy future is not just for people who have property and people who have the ability to go solar directly on their property, but for everyone. And last, and something that's particularly close to our hearts, is this idea of community-based power. It's something that's local. It may not be directly in your neighborhood, but it's nearby. It's contributing electricity to the local grid, and it is ultimately something that should keep as much of that value of that solar energy in the community as possible. Is it available everywhere? No, actually it isn't. It is available in only places, as you can see here, where it's been legislatively mandated, so somebody passed a law, or the utility decided that they were going to implement community solar. When you're talking about a program that's been, that's been legislatively mandated, typically there's going to be more input in how that program gets designed. Commonly, although it's certainly optional for utilities who are regulated by state entities, that they are participating, but they may or may not be the only ones. Ideally, there's competition there. And when there's a utility that's doing it, they're essentially just saying, we want to do this. And that can lead to lots of different outcomes. Sometimes it's a really good program. Sometimes it might not be. But it's ultimately up to the utility about how that program is structured. And frequently it comes with less input from community about how that program works and how it operates for individuals, and ultimately what the benefits are that flow back to the community. So when you look at that, I want to make sure that there's a little bit of a distinction here, because we have some states where these programs are being implemented at the state level. Other times they might be implemented even at a local level. And if I understand correctly, New Orleans is actually implementing community solar. They are in charge of their utility, their municipal utility there, and they are actually implementing a program at the city level, which is also true in DC. But most of the time when you're making it available, the legislative mandate, it's going to be done at the state level. But just want to point out that that's not always the case. I have a little bit of a case study here for this. This is something that we were directly involved in, excuse me, in DC, making this happen. So these are pictures from back in 2011 to 2012, 2013, when the District of Columbia program was established. And what that involves a lot of times is really like any other legislation, it is building a base of supporters. It's coordinating with other partner organizations and other people who are interested in doing this. It's educating lawmakers about why it's important, and ultimately working with lawmakers and this coalition to be able to craft legislation that is something that's going to make community solar available to everyone. So it's work involved, but I would say it's important work. And if you're in a state that does not have community solar that's mandated at the state level and isn't available to everyone, and you want to work on that, then there are lots of organizations out there that are probably going to be interested in supporting you. And some of them are education or energy organizations, and some of them are community-based organizations. There are also some great national groups that are working on this, in addition to Solar United Neighbors. Vote Solar is nationwide. They work on community solar policy. Solar Energy Industry Association, SEIA, also does that. CCSA, the Coalition for Community Solar Access, which is the community solar industry trade group. They also work to advance community solar policies. IREC, Interstate Renewable Energy Council, and lots of other organizations. So if you're someplace that doesn't have community solar right now and you're interested, feel free to get in touch with us. You're always welcome to contact us. We don't have unlimited resources, but we're always willing to connect somebody to a group or other organization that is interested in working on that as well. Feel free to just email us. You can email us at info@solarunitedneighbors.org. And we'll be happy to try to connect you to the right resources. And if you're in one of those states that was orange on that map I showed earlier, gonna go back to that for a second, and you're interested in making community solar happen where it doesn't exist, definitely get in touch with us and we will put you in contact with our state director. So coming back to this DC example, it took a couple years, right? We had to go through and work through those details, and then once it was implemented and we were able to pass it, it also involved some monitoring of the program afterwards. Is it working? Has it been rolled out the way that it was intended? Sometimes there were fixes that have to be made afterwards. In the DC example, just to give you one example, the way that the credits were applied was not in the spirit of the law, so we had to go back and try to get that fixed by the legislature to go through and rewrite some of the law to make it more clear about how those virtual credits were applied. So lots of opportunities. Just want to make sure folks understand it's like any other advocacy effort, right? You got to find your supporters, you got to build your base, and you need to push it forward. And there's other people out there that want to do this work with you. This map, I think I can draw some distinctions here. This is from our friends at Solstice. Any of the red states, there may be a few that are missing here now that I'm looking at it, but all the red states are places where it is widely available. So there's some mandate at the state level in most cases. And the blue states are where there's some example of a project that's happening. So just roughly speaking, those are places where a utility has implemented their own program, or maybe there's a city-based program or a smaller jurisdiction that's implemented it, but it's not available all over. So there's some variation in the types of solar that's out there. We're going to community solar, and we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. Before we get into some of the program details about the differences in community solar programs, I want to just shift our focus just briefly to equity. At the beginning of the presentation, one thing I really mentioned that I hope you picked up on is that community solar is a way for us to increase access to solar for a lot of people because of the way that it functions. But by itself, it's not the end of making access to solar equitable. It really takes more intention than that. And the map here with some of these stars are some examples of places where programs implemented in those states have some specific accommodations to try to boost or try to encourage low and moderate income access to community solar in particular. Excuse me, that intentionality can come in a lot of different forms. It might be that there is a structure to encourage projects to be built. So Maryland, for example, has that. They carve out some space in their program for low and moderate income projects that because it's a scarce resource of access to the program, it encourages people to do that. I've got another example I'll show you from another state where they handle it a little bit differently. And it's not just about encouraging those projects, but a lot of times it's also about making sure that there's some additional supports that might be necessary so that people who subscribe to low and moderate income projects or focus projects, that access is available not only for people to subscribe, but also that there is some meaningful savings that's going to come from that. So that might take a loan guarantee maybe from the state or a philanthropic organization. There's a great group in Maryland called Climate Access Fund that we work with, who is providing backup for investment to make sure that community solar investors are okay with low and moderate income subscribers, because there's this common perception, although we would say that a lot of times it's not true, is that that low and moderate income subscribers may be more of a risk to pay their bills. There's a lot of good data to suggest that utility bills and the like are consistently paid, even for folks that might be in the income qualified category. but some supports might be needed. The other thing that is needed or is some focus on education and outreach, not just for the public at large, but specifically if you're trying to build an income qualified program for community solar, that at the state and local level, there are resources available, not just community organizations, but also city agencies and state agencies who are aware of the program, aware of the value, and are out there actually connecting people and connecting the dots so that they see that it's real and that it has value for them and that it doesn't feel like something that maybe is not true. There's a lot of things that compete for everyone's attention when it comes to marketing and low and moderate income communities in particular. There's a little bit of a history with retail electricity supply and with other offerings that might make folks a little suspicious. So it's incumbent upon state agencies and community organizations to take the time to promote and really draw those distinctions. And then last, the structures of the offerings themselves, right? So no termination fees or really small ones, if anything, very limited short length contracts, making the program accessible in a lot of different ways, as well as how people are qualified. This is a little bit of of a longer conversation, which I won't talk about tonight, but the mechanisms to see whether somebody qualifies to participate as an income qualified participant in a program, that the way that gets done can create a burden in and of itself, either for the participant or for the developer or for both. So thinking through that is also really important. So just want to shine a light on this right now. It's really important to us and the work that we do. And we hope that if you're someplace where you're still thinking about a program, or maybe you're a place that has a program that doesn't have this, is that you advocate for that as well. It's very critical that as we expand access, that we are aware that it's available to everyone truly, and that those benefits from community solar are equally accessible. I'm going to pause there just for a second. Lisa, do we have any questions that have come up?
None yet.
Cool. Well, let me give you an example. So this is a spotlight on New Jersey in terms of low-income access to solar. You can see here there's some capacity that's dedicated specifically to projects that have a certain percentage of income qualified participants. And that the way they structure that is that this is obviously at a high level, but there are additional points awarded when projects are selected if there's a component of low-income subscribers in the project, right? So you're not necessarily adding an economic incentive here for the subscriber, that is also needed in some cases, but you're encouraging the developers to create projects that have an income qualified component to it. So that's something that can be done at the state level, at the policy level, and just says publicly to developers that this is important and it's something they need to be aware of as well. Give you another one here. This is a little bit of a different example. In DC, Washington, DC, there's Solar for All. There's also a Solar for All program in Illinois, but the DC Solar for All program, which has goals to deliver 50% energy reduction for 100,000 households by 2032. Much of the program, much of the mechanism for delivering those savings and meeting the goals of that program are done through the city's community solar law, which was passed earlier as a mechanism to deliver those credits and to enable that access. So this example here you're looking at is an installation that's part of that program. It's on an affordable housing complex, and the energy from the project, which is made possible by those community solar laws, supports the reduction of those energy bills for close to 200 income qualified residents. This is the Atlantic Terrace apartments, which you see on the credit there, and that was one of the first projects to come online using the community solar program to deliver savings to qualified residents in that housing complex. And again, that's part of the DC Solar for All program that's running over the next 13 years at least to be able to provide access to meet those goals. I'm going to switch a little bit gears a little bit here into community solar and talk a little bit more about sort of what distinguishes different types of community solar, because there's a lot of stuff out there. Before we get into that, just want to highlight a resource we have on our site. You can see the link here. Lisa's going to put it in the chat box as well. This is our guide for community solar. So there's a lot of, as I said, a lot of different variations, which I'll talk about in a minute. If you want to see what we think about it, we've put it all in one place, and you're welcome to read through that. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback on it. Is community solar the same? I think I've already said that it's not. There's a lot of different types out there. Just to be upfront and clear, we support every possible option of solar out there, but we do feel like some mechanisms are more equitable and appropriate than others in some cases. And for community solar, we think it has a lot of value done in a certain way, and that's what we advocate for. But I just want to be clear, we're not talking about do it or not do it. We're saying, let's do as many of these programs as possible, and whenever we can, let's make them as best as they possibly can be, right? Is every program going to have every component? Probably not, but we think every program that's out there and every one that's coming should include these and should work towards them if they don't. So one, as you can see, access for everyone. Financial benefits as well, right? So meaningful and verifiable electricity savings. When done right and with a program that's structured the way that it can be, solar should create savings and not come at a premium for people who just because they want to support solar, which, there's a lot of programs out there that do that. That's fine as a starting point, but it can be better. And in places where the programs are structured like that, it is. Two, easy to subscribe and unsubscribe, right? You want to make sure people can come and go and make it as easy for people to participate as possible. Transparent and friendly customer process. So that's more on the developers, but there are certain things that can happen at the state level as well in terms of required disclosures, things that are that consumers need to know about the offerings that they're looking at, as well as making sure that there's participation at all levels, which I mentioned earlier. Another one, which is a little bit of a side topic, but is an important one, is enabling access to multifamily residential buildings. So that's a little bit more tricky, but it's important to create programs that enable multifamily buildings to be able to participate, whether they have a master meter, a single meter, or whether they have multiple meters. And then last but not least, that it is chosen, right? That you can opt into it. This is not something where everybody gets opted in, but it's a competitive market and people are choosing to participate. Next sort of major category, local benefits. Making sure that the program enables communities to make choices about where their energy is sourced from, and that there's a clear connection to the projects, right? This is not just a lot of a generation that's somewhere else that's flowing into the grid. These are specific projects in certain neighborhoods or in certain communities. You know where it is. It might be a portfolio of those projects, but these are local sited projects that are sited responsibly. So in coordination with communities and following good zoning practices for development, but they are local projects. And also that they're ideally creating some sort of local job support as well, either in construction or afterwards in maintenance. And that might take a couple different forms. It might be just maintenance jobs for a local electrical or solar company. It might also be maintenance for the grounds around an array if it's excuse me, if it's a ground-based array. Whether it's mowing and landscaping or our preference, pollinator habitat management, sheep grazing is also possible. Those are opportunities for local businesses to be able to support solar access, the solar economy in their communities. And last one, this is a big one for us, competition. Making sure that there are opportunities for not only for the utility, but also for people, individuals, businesses, nonprofits, to be able to own and operate these facilities. And all of the development benefits that come from fair competition should create lower prices and encourage innovation. We see that in certain programs. We'd like to see it everywhere. It's where multiple actors can own and operate a solar array, where they can sign up customers, where they're able to, or owner members to be able to create an array, and then see a share of that generated kilowatt hour that's coming from the array credited on their utility bill. One thing to note here, when we say multiple actors, I'm also talking about groups of individuals organized in a community to own and operate a project. This is a particularly challenging form of development. It's not one that is widespread, but with community solar, it is possible. And we'll go into that a little bit more in our third episode, which I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. And that's something that I said, it's less common, but it is a very, I think, fulfilling in terms of keeping as much of the value in a local community as possible. And there are some good examples of that out there already. I'm going to pause here for a second before I keep going. Lisa, any questions before I move on?
Yes, we have a couple. So Ashley wants to know if there's a public rating system for community solar providers.
There's not a public rating system that I'm aware of that certain state agencies probably list providers in their area. We also have a platform, which Lisa hasn't chatted yet. She'll chat it. It's not a rating system, but we do list subscriptions that are available that we know of in Maryland, DC, and Minnesota, and Colorado, which we're still building. But as far as actually like ratings, consumer ratings, I'm not aware of any at this point. Other questions?
Yes, one more. Janet wants to know, how would you recommend someone living in a gated community in Maryland where the HOA may not allow solar? What would you recommend for them?
Yeah, Janet, thanks for the question. For what we're talking about here, that wouldn't require any property used in the gated community. So you could subscribe to a project somewhere else in your utility area. One thing to know about, so Janet, I think maybe lives on the Eastern Shore. You would need to be a Delmarva customer because they're participating in the Maryland program. If you're a Chop Tank customer, Chop Tank, which is an electric cooperative on the Eastern Shore, is not participating, so that wouldn't work. But if you're a Delmarva customer, there should be projects available for you to sign up so that the solar is elsewhere in Delmarva territory and you're getting the electricity credited to your bill virtually, so you don't need to put it on your property. If you did want to put it on your property, you'd obviously have to navigate your HOA, and we can help with that. If you're running into roadblocks, feel free to contact us in either case. So if you're specifically for Maryland, you can email us at mdteam@solarunitedneighbors.org. Other questions?
That's it for now.
All right, onward we go. So we'll put a little spotlight here. We just talked about that, nice little segue, but I want to just point out a little bit for Maryland as an example of competition. So there's no restrictions on the way the program is structured in terms of project ownership. An individual could own one. We helped somebody do that in Baltimore a couple years ago. A group of businesses could form an LLC and own it. Companies could own and operate it who specialize in community solar. That's the majority of what's happening now, and there are a lot of projects being built. There's also no minimum project size. So even a smaller project that might be on a roof where you're sort of splitting the energy between a couple of different people is possible in this program. Is it going to be a lot of projects that happen like that? Not necessarily, but we don't want to limit that. We want to make community solar is a very flexible tool, and we want to make sure that we don't limit it just because it's not the predominant model. And then finally, that one-to-one bill credit. What do I mean by that? I mean that for every kilowatt hour that you get credit for from your array, the electricity that goes out to the grid from the array, that you get a credit for all that, the same value of that, the volumetric value of that electricity. So all the charges that add up to how much you pay per kilowatt hour, that credit shows up on your bill, which means essentially that is the same as if you had it on your roof, as if you were a rooftop system in terms of the way that the electricity is credited. So what does that do? It helps competition. It creates an ecosystem that you'll see here. These are just we don't have any particular support for any of these companies, but I took these, most of these come from the Coalition for Community Solar Access's member list. But you can see there are a lot of companies out there working in a lot of different states trying to create competitive offerings for consumers. And when you've got that drives down price. It creates more competitive offerings than if you just had a single provider offering everything to everyone. There's some really good variation there too. A couple here, for example, not to pick one in particular, but just because I know it's a good example of a different model. Cooperative Energy Futures, which is based in Minnesota, has a co-op model. The individual members are the ones that actually own and operate the array through a legitimate cooperative structure, right? So those things are possible. All the other offerings that are out there, lots of different variations, but when you've got a program that enables individual entities to create projects and market them to the public and own and operate them, you get more competition. Simple as that. The last slide I think I have for this evening is just to draw some distinctions here. We talked a lot about what we'd like to see in community solar, what we think it is, and I just want to spend a couple minutes at the end talking about the things that other people have talked about that have different names that often kind of get mixed in with community solar. The one here is this idea of a green tariff or green power, right? So we define this as a service plan offered by the utility that has some or all of that electricity from the plan coming directly from renewable sources. And I want to make clear, green tariffs are fine, right? They favor renewables over fossil fuel production, but They often come at a premium price, not always, but sometimes. The source of electricity may not be in the state, and they're not proportional. You're using it, it's covering all of your electricity. You don't have a lot of choice, right? So it's definitely an option that moves us forward further into renewable adoption, and we think that's great, but it's not community solar. The second one are utility-owned programs. So again, these are, we would define this as a special offer by a utility where consumers can choose to opt in. So it's similar to community solar. They can subscribe to the energy for one or more specific arrays a lot of times and get those credits on the bill. Again, utility-owned subscribers programs can be fine, but they favor renewables over fossil fuels. Again, fantastic. And they're usually built in the communities where they serve, which is also great. The reason we think these aren't the best form or the true form of community solar is because sometimes they come at a premium price. The information about how those projects are developed is not always clear. There's no competition involved. They may send an RFP for who builds the project, but there's not competition for people's business. Excuse me. And that ultimately there's less transparency involved in how these projects are created, right? So it's better than fossil fuels, and it's really an important part of the marketplace where the utility is offering these things. It's better than not offering them. But just to come back to the point I made earlier, we think there's a better way to do community solar and one that is more true, and that those offering all the things that I listed, that's really what we're striving for. So that's one of the reasons why we just want to make that clear at the end of the presentation. And again, there's lots of good other projects like that out there. If you're interested in seeing some of those examples, feel free to contact us. We've got, there's some organizations that do a good job of tracking all the different variations of these types of projects, and happy to try to connect you with some informational resources. And that is everything that we've got for this evening. Just a little bit on what's next. If you want to read our community solar guide, you feel free to come to that link there. Lisa has probably put it in the chat box already, and she'll do so again. If you want to look at projects in your area and you're in, I didn't put it on here, but if you're in DC, Maryland, Minnesota, or Colorado, feel free to come to our platform and take a look at what we've got there. It's not every project, but we try our best to keep it up to date. And if you have feedback for us, please do get in touch. We don't have perfect information and we don't have perfect resources, but we want to make sure that we're given the best info out there that we can. And we always want to hear your feedback. You can reach us at the info at the bottom of that slide there. And we thank everybody very much for coming tonight. Thanks for spending an hour, close to an hour of your time with us. And we'll stick around for questions. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and pull up the participant list. If folks want to ask questions along the way, feel free. Lisa, if we have any from the chat, if you could read those out. And if anybody wants to raise your hand and ask a question, I will unmute you and you'll be able to ask away. And I'm going to pause here just for a minute and take a drink. So Lisa, any questions?
Great. Yes, we have 2 raised hands, but before we get to them, I want to just highlight a couple things. So Dean asked, can you provide a list of projects in the PEPCO territory in Maryland? I did put that in the chat, but Corey, if you want to just highlight how to find those again.
Yeah, so if you go to cs.solarunitedneighbors.org, on that front page there, you'll select Maryland, and then it's going to ask you which utility. So just select PEPCO. There'll be a place for you to sort of set your utility usage. And then on the next screen, it'll show you a listing of all the projects that we know that are open for subscription.
And real quick, a comment from Ron. He says, Maryland has a state law that prohibits HOAs from prohibiting solar installation on residents' homes. I didn't know if you wanted to say anything about that, Corey.
Sorry. Yes, thank you, Ron. Ron, thanks for joining. It's good to see you here. Maryland does have a law. There's a little bit of ambiguity there, but there is some language in statute that says that HOAs can't create unreasonable restrictions. So the gray area obviously is what's unreasonable. But if you're in a place where you want to put solar on your property and you're having problems with your HOA, please do get in touch with us. In Maryland, as I said, it's mdteam@solarunitedneighbors.org. And Ron, it looks like you had your hand up as well. I don't know if you have a separate question, but I'm going to go ahead and unmute you here if you want to ask. And if that was the question and I answered it, then that's good too. Ron, go ahead. Oh, having a little trouble unmuting you there. All right, I'm going to go to Christine. I'm not sure why that's not unmuting. Oh, there you go. Ron. It,
Yeah, my question is, looking at community solar, the way it's been marketing, especially marketed to people in low and moderate income communities, I was trying to get an idea of how the benefits of the subscription is broken down. Also, I'd like to know if you have individual developers who may have uh, megawatt size solar farm projects that might be in regulated markets. If could, how could they work with community solar programs to try to push to get some legislative change in those markets? So that, because one of the biggest issues is they can't identify their own off takers, and I was just trying to figure out how could they work with these community solar programs.
okay, so your first question about low and moderate income subscriptions, at least in Maryland anyways, the offerings are often a percentage below the retail rate for electricity. And so there are a number of offerings. They're still growing, but I know there's definitely some in BGE territory for sure, where it's a greater percentage below retail for folks that are income qualified. So that's sort of the primary vehicle for delivering savings, and that would be on a monthly basis. You would still get charged for electricity, but if you paid 13 cents before, you would pay 25% below that. You'd pay the utility company a lower rate, a lower cost, because you're getting credits, and then you'd pay the rest to the community solar subscriber, and the combination of those two should be less than what you paid before. So the two bill thing is a little bit of a problem, which we're aware of and would like to solve, but it's a percentage below the utility rate is how that savings is delivered. And your second question, you were asking about capacity. Were you talking about Maryland specifically, or in other places where there's no programs?
In markets where there aren't programs, but there are many, say, developers that have projects on the drawing boards, 20 and 30 megawatt size farms.
Got it.
And they cannot, of course, in those regulated markets, identify all takers, and they're basically at the mercy of the utility companies in those regulated markets. But can they work with any of these community solar organizations that may be in a deregulated market that might be interested in working with someone who has a viable project, but all they need is off takers?
Yeah, so if it's not legislatively enabled and there's no path forward, the developers are obviously going to look for their, the best route for them to create their project. But I would encourage, developers in that category to contact the CCSA, the Coalition for Community Solar Access, become a member, and start advocating for solar in those, in the states where they have those projects.
All right, thank you very much.
Working as as part of the industry.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Christine, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you here so you can ask your question.
Okay. Yes. Would it make sense for someone who already has their own solar panels on the house to subscribe to community solar? And would it increase my end of year credits? Because right now my bill is zero because I'm generating more electricity than I'm using. So would it make sense economically? Would it increase my end of year credits? I get over $100 a year in credit from Pepco. Also, I am thinking of getting an EV car next year, and having it connected to my house solar panels, which would increase my use of electricity. Would it only pay once I get my EV car to join community solar?
Thanks, Christine. Yeah, so it sounds like you're already generating more than your annual usage from your rooftop solar. So I wouldn't yeah. Personally recommend you get community solar because you already have your local needs covered. But after you install your EV charger, if it looks like your solar on site is not covering all of your electricity needs, then depending on the subscription offering, you could cover the rest of that with community solar. Yeah, so I would wait and see what your usage looks like afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Looks like Elise Mason. Go ahead and hold on here. Actually, Elise, it looks like you've got an older version of Zoom here. If you could, it's not going to let me allow you to talk for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why. If you could chat your question, that would be great. I apologize that I can't unmute you there.
Corey, we've got a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
One's from Leslie. She says, do you know if there's a third-party evaluation of utility-owned programs? She says the one Duke in Indiana offers has a 70% overhead and seems like a scam.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of research out there that covers different programs, but I don't know that there's one that's sort of nationwide. Places I know, and I don't have handy the information right now to be able to put it in the chat box, but I know that there's some researchers at University of Minnesota that track a lot of these programs. SEPA, which is the Solar Electric Power Association. It's not solar, I don't think anymore, but they work a lot with utilities who have community solar programs, and I know that they track a lot of it, but I don't know how much of it is public and sort of in a reviewed fashion versus just being aware that they're there. So sorry, I don't have a specific resource there, but if you're looking for info about a particular project, you feel free to email us as well. If we can connect you to somebody who can help, we're happy to do that.
Thank you. And John wants to know how to get more utilities to offer this in Minnesota.
Thanks, John. I think for utility, so just for other folks, the utility program, the program in Minnesota, like the statewide one, is Excel, but there are other utilities that have their own programs. If you're working, if you're in a utility that's not Excel, I think you're really talking about advocating directly to the utility. So like an electric cooperative, essentially, would be most of those, I think. And I apologize, I'm not 100% super familiar with all of the lay of the land in Minnesota with regard to utilities. But if you're in an electric cooperative area, you're a member, just in that particular example. Or if you're in a municipal utility area, you're a constituent of who's running that utility. You should absolutely speak up to who runs the utility from that role and encourage them to do that. And if you don't get anywhere with that, you need to start advocating and working with others who are in your community to press leadership to be able to do that. And that can definitely be effective, right? Especially electric cooperatives. A lot of people don't know that they're members of that cooperative and they have more power than they think they do. So banding together and requesting things and trying to force that forward can sometimes be effective.
And the last question we have in the chat right now is from Alan. If community solar can lower subscribing consumers' bills, why doesn't the regulator require the savings to be shared among all consumers as part of a least cost supply plan for the whole system?
Okay, so I think if I'm understanding the question right, so if a community solar program is somebody's opting in, it's creating savings, why isn't that shared amongst all the ratepayers because they're lowering the cost? I don't have an answer for that other than there are other ways to do that. There's nothing stopping a Public Service Commission from changing the way that electricity is sourced broadly for the electricity mix for the utility. But for community solar specifically, we're talking about having individuals be able to opt into a competitive marketplace and invest their time or money to participate and therefore get those benefits because of that. So I don't think it's either or. I think it can be both. Offering community solar as an option to create that competitive marketplace we think is an important component, but it doesn't mean that the percentage of fuel that comes from the utilities, that the way that pricing is happening and the way those contracts are sourced can also be geared towards renewables and potentially creating more savings. I mean, it's obviously going to be very specific on utility areas. So maybe not the best answer to that question. That's a little bit outside of my experience level in terms of working on utility contracts, but we feel like community solar is an important piece of the competitive landscape, and that as such, people who are participating should be able to benefit from making those choices.
And we have Elise's question in the chat now. Thanks, Elise, for typing that up. It says, in Rhode Island and I believe other states, you can't put up a rooftop array that generates more than your annual usage. Could it be beneficial and logistically feasible for a policy to allow rooftop solar as a community solar source within a neighborhood per se?
So in terms of the program structure, there's no reason you couldn't do that if you had, if you were able to essentially over install on a location that wasn't using all that electricity. It really comes down to, in a lot of cases, to the level of effort to sort of set that structure up. I'll give you one example where I know that that's worked, because we helped somebody in Baltimore do that, where they were owning a rental building and they were able to install an array that was big enough to cover the rental building's common loads. And then they took the other electricity output through the community solar program and offset their electricity bill. They lived down the street, and their somebody else's, I think it was his sister, who lived somewhere else in the utility territory. So from a program perspective, there's no reason those projects can't happen. It has more to do, as long as it's enabled by legislation, with the other things you have to do outside of rooftop solar, which is, subscribe to be get yourself set up as a community solar organization to be able to control the array and have you registered like that. So there's usually some rules about participating in the program. So those just create more overhead, but there's no reason why somebody couldn't do that if there were a program that enabled that. And it's kind of a long answer, but it really comes down to sort of what does the program look like, and do the economics work to do it at that small scale. Looks like Ashley has a question as well. I'm going to unmute you, Ashley. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks. So one thing I remain sort of unclear on is what exactly the typical developer looks like. What role does the developer specifically play? And say in Baltimore, if I had a potential project, how would I go about finding a potential developer to work with?
So there's a lot of different types of developers, and episode 3 we'll get into this a little bit more. It's depending on where the project is in its life cycle. There might be somebody who finds the land and then sort of does the pre-development, and then we'll give it to another developer who gets the contractor to build it, or they might build it themselves and finds the subscribers and finances it and all of that. If you have land where you think you want to have a project be hosted, going through that process is going to be a little bit different, because you're trying to find the people who to sort of start the project off. What I would recommend is actually just, if you can just send us an email, mdteam@solarunitedneighbors.org. I'm happy to sort of give you some ideas about where to start specifically in Maryland. The short answer for that is find a developer who can give you a proposal on sort of doing the whole thing if it's a small scale project, or if you just want to be the land host, you're finding somebody who can sort of take that over and run with it, and you're just getting paid for leasing the property. So it also depends on how you want to participate, if you want to invest in it, or whether you just want to be the physical location that has the array, but somebody else owns and operates it.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Anything else come up on the chat, Lisa?
Yes, one just came up as I started speaking.
We'll do this. This will be the last one. It looks like we're over time, but let's do this last one here.
Okay, great. And just so everyone knows, I did just put the link to sign up for our next webinar in the chat. So if you want to join us for number 3 of our 3-part series, you're welcome to use that link. So Bridget wants to know, what progress is Virginia making on creating a community solar program?
That is a great question, Bridget. I have not followed that program closely, but as far as I recall, they have passed legislation for the community solar program. And I think they're in the process of sort of getting themselves ready to write regulations in the next couple of months. So that's wonderful news. I don't have a lot of details on it, because I said I'm not following that program too closely. But if you want to get more info on there, feel free to email us, va@solarunitedneighbors.org. And we can try to get you some more info. So that was a good piece of news that came out of the legislature in Virginia recently, that they had passed that. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Really appreciate you coming and staying and asking great questions. You can tell from, answer some of these questions, we don't have all the answers, but we always want to try to find the information that you need and make sure that people are able to engage with these programs, that we're able to increase access where these programs don't exist, and that they're the best possible version of the programs that we can imagine to be able to provide access to clean energy throughout the United States. I'm going to be sending out a recording to this, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. You'll get it probably in the next day or so. And thanks again for spending a little bit of time with us this evening. And hopefully we'll see you next week for episode 3, which is on project development. Thank you, everybody.